In Desert and Wilderness, Chapter 5. During the following days there were no excursions. Instead, on Christmas Eve, when the first star appeared in heaven, a little tree in Mr. Rawlinson's tent, intended for Nell, was illuminated with hundreds of candles. To serve as a Christmas tree, there had been taken an arborvitae cut in one of the gardens in Medinet. Nevertheless, among its branchlets, Nell found a profusion of dainties and a splendid doll, which her father had brought from Cairo for her, and Staś, his much-desired English short rifle. In addition, he received from his father packages containing various hunter's supplies and a saddle for horseback riding. Nell could not contain herself for joy, while Staś, although he thought that whoever owned a genuine short rifle ought to possess a corresponding dignity, could not restrain himself, and selecting the time when no one was about, walked around the tent on his hands. This knack, taught to him at the portside school, he possessed to a surprising degree, and with it often amused Nell, who besides sincerely envied it in him. Christmas Eve and the first day of the holidays were passed by the children partly in church services, partly in inspecting the gifts they had received, and in training Saba. The new friend appeared to possess intelligence beyond all expectations. On the very first day he learned to give his paw, retrieve handkerchiefs, which however he would not surrender without some resistance, and he understood that cleaning Nell's face with his tongue was an act unworthy of a gentlemanly dog. Nell, holding her fingers at her little nose, gave him various instructions, while he, concurring with motions of his tail, gave her in this manner to understand that he heard with becoming attention and took her lessons to heart. During the strolls over the sandy city square, the fame of Saba in Medinet grew with each hour, and even as all fame began to have its disagreeable side, for it drew a whole swarm of Arabian children. In the beginning they kept at a distance. Afterwards, however, emboldened by the gentleness of the monster, they approached more and more closely, and in the end sat around the tent so that no one could move about with any freedom. Besides, as every Arabian child sucks sugar cane from morning to night, which besides being loathsome are noxious, for they spread the Egyptian infection of inflammation of the eyes. For these reasons the servants attempted to disperse the children, but Nell stood in their defense, and what is more, distributed among the youngest hello, that is, sweetmeats, which gained her their great love but also increased their number. After 3 days the joint excursion began, partly on the narrow gauge railways, of which the English had built quite a number in Medinet El Fayum, partly on donkeys, and sometimes on camels. It appeared that in the praise bestowed on those animals by Idris there was indeed a great deal of exaggeration, for not merely kidney beans but even people could not easily keep on the saddles, but there was also some truth. The camels in reality belonged to the variety known as hagim, that is, for carrying passengers, and were fed with goat durra, the local or Syrian maize, so that the hams were fat and they appeared so willing to speed that it was necessary to check them. The Sudanese, Idris and Gebr, gained, notwithstanding the wild glitter of their eyes, the confidence and hearts of the company, and this through their great willingness to serve and their extraordinary care over Nell. Gebr always had a cruel and a trifle bestial expression of face, but Idris, quickly perceiving that the little personage was the eye in the head of the whole company, declared at every opportunity that he cared more for her than for his own soul. Mr. Rawlinson conjectured indeed that through Nell Idris wanted to reach his pocket, but believing at the same time that there was not in the world a person who could not but love his only child, he was grateful to him and did not stint himself in giving bakshish. In the course of 5 days, the party visited the nearby ruins of the ancient city of Crocodipolis, where at one time the Egyptians worshipped a deity called Sopk, which had a human form with the head of a crocodile. Afterwards, an excursion was made to the Hanar pyramids and the remains of the labyrinth. The longest trip was on camelback to Lake Korun. Its northern shore was a stark desert on which there were ruins of former Egyptian cities, but no trace of life. On the other hand, on the southern shore stretched a fertile country, magnificent, with shores overgrown by heather and reeds and teeming with pelicans, flamingos, herons, wild geese and ducks. Only here did Staś find an opportunity for displaying his marksmanship. The shooting from a common rifle as well as from the short rifle was so extraordinary that after every shot could be heard the astonished smacking of the lips of Idris and the Arabian rowers, and the falling of the birds into the water was accompanied by exclamations of Bismillah and Mashallah. The Arabians assured them that on the opposite desert shore were many wolves and hyenas, and that by tossing amid the sand dunes the carcass of a sheep one might get within shooting range. In consequence of these assurances, Pan Tarkowski and Staś passed 2 nights on the desert near the ruins of Dima. But the first sheep was stolen by Bedouins as soon as the hunters left it, while the second lured only a lame jackal which Staś brought down. Further hunting had to be postponed, as the time had arrived for both engineers to inspect the works conducted at Bahr Yusuf near Al-Lahun, southeast from Medinet. Mr. Rawlinson waited only for the arrival of Madame Oliver. Unfortunately, in place of her came a letter from the physician informing them that the former erysipelas in the face had recurred after the bite, and that the patient for a long time would be unable to leave port side. The situation actually became distressing. It was impossible to take with them the children, old Dinah, the tents, and all the servants, if only for the reason that the engineers were to be one day here, another there, and might receive requests to go as far as the great canal of Ibrahimiyeh. In view of this, after a short consultation, Mr. Rawlinson decided to leave Nell under the care of old Dinah and Staś, together with the Italian consular agent and the local mudir, governor, with whom he had previously become acquainted. He promised also to Nell, who grieved to part from her father, that from all the nearer localities he would, with Pan Tarkowski, rush to Medinet, or if they found some noteworthy sight, would summon the children to them. "We shall take with us Hamis," he said, "whom in a certain case we shall send for you. Let Dinah always keep Nell's company, but as Nell does with her whatever she pleases, do you, Staś, watch over both." "You may be sure, sir," answered Staś, "that I shall watch over Nell as over my own sister. She has Saba and I a short rifle, so let anyone try to harm her." "It is not about that I am concerned," said Mr. Rawlinson. "Saba and the short rifle will certainly not be necessary for you. You will be so good as to protect her from fatigue and at the same time take care she does not catch cold. I have asked the consul, in case she feels unwell, to summon a doctor from Cairo immediately. We shall send Hamis here for news as frequently as possible. The mudir will also visit you. I expect, besides, that our absence will never be very long." Pan Tarkowski also was not sparing his admonitions to Staś. He told him that Nell did not require his defense, as there was not in Medinet nor in the whole province of El Fayum any savage people or wild animals. To think of such things would be ridiculous and unworthy of a boy who had begun his 14th year. So he was to be solicitous and heedful only that they did not undertake anything on their own account, and more particularly excursions with Nell on camels, on which a ride was fatiguing. But Nell, hearing this, made such a sad face that Pan Tarkowski had to placate her. "Certainly," he said, stroking her hair, "you will ride camels, but with us or towards us, if we send Hamis for you." "But when alone, are we not allowed to make an excursion, even though such a tiny bit of a one?" asked the girl, and she began to show on her finger about how little an excursion she was concerned. The parents in the end agreed that they could ride on donkeys, not on camels, and not to ruins, where they might easily fall into some hole, but over roads of adjacent fields and towards the gardens beyond the city. The dragoman, together with other cook servants, was always to accompany the children. After this, both gentlemen departed, but they left for a place nearby, Hanaret el Matka, so that after 10 hours they returned to pass the night in Medinet. This was repeated the succeeding few days until they had inspected all the nearest work. Afterwards, when their employment required their presence at more distant places, Hamis arrived in the night time and early in the following morning took Staś and Nell to those little cities in which their parents wanted to show them something of interest. The children spent the greater part of the day with their parents and before sunset returned to the camp at Medinet. There were, however, days on which Hamis did not come, and then Nell, notwithstanding the society of Staś, and Saba, in whom she continually discovered some new traits, looked with longing for a messenger. In this manner the time passed until 12th night, on the day of which festival both engineers returned to Medinet. 2 days later they went away again, announcing that they left this time for a longer period and in all probability would reach as far as Beni Suef and from there to El Fachn, where a canal of the same name begins, going far south alongside of the Nile. Great, therefore, was the astonishment of the children when on the third day at 11 o'clock in the morning Hamis appeared in Medinet. Staś met him first as he went to the pasturage to look at the camels. Hamis conversed with Idris and only told Staś that he came for him and Nell and that he would come immediately to the camp to inform them where they, at the request of the older gentleman, were to go. Staś ran at once with the good news to Nell, whom he found playing with Saba before the tent. "Do you know, Hamis is here," he cried from a distance, and Nell began at once to hop, holding both feet together as little girls do when skipping the rope. We shall go, yes, we shall go, and far." "Where?" she asked, brushing aside with her little hands a tuft of hair which fell over her eyes. "I don't know. Hamis said that in a moment he would come here and tell us." "How do you know it is far?" "Because I had Idris say that he and Gebr would start at once with the camels." "That means that we shall go by rail and shall find the camels at the place where our parents will be, and from there we shall make some kind of an excursion." The tuft of hair, owing to the continual hops, covered again not only Nell's eyes but her whole face, her feet bounding as if they were made of india rubber. A quarter of an hour later Hamis came and bowed to both. "Khanage, young master," he said, "we leave after 3 hours by the first train." "Where are we going?" "To Garak el Sultani, and from there with the older gentleman on camelback to Wadi Rayyan." Staś's heart beat with joy, but at the same time Hamis' words surprised him. He knew that Wadi Ryan was a great valley among sandy hills rising on the Libyan desert, on the south and southwest of Medinet, while on the other hand Pan Tarkowski and Mr. Rawlinson announced on their departure that they were going in a directly opposite direction, towards the Nile. "What has happened?" asked Staś. "Then my father and Mr. Rawlinson are not in Beni Suef, but in El Karak?" "It happened thus," replied Hamis, "but they ordered us to write to them at El Fakhn." In a letter the senior Effendi explains why they are at El Karak. And for a while he searched on his person for the letter, after which he exclaimed, "O Nabi, Prophet, I left the letter in a pouch with the camels. I will run at once before Idris and Gebr depart." And he ran towards the camels. In the meantime, the children with Dinah began to prepare for the journey. As it looked as if the excursion would be a long one, Dinah packed several dresses, some linen, and warmer clothing for Nell. Staś thought of himself and especially did not forget about the short rifle and cartridges, hoping that among the sand dunes of Wadi Ryan he might encounter wolves and hyenas. Hamis did not return until an hour later. He was covered with perspiration and so fatigued that for a while he could not catch his breath. "I did not find the camels," he said. "I chased after them, but in vain. But that does not matter, as we shall find the letter and the Effendis themselves in El Karak. Is Dinah to go with you?" "Why not? Perhaps it would be better if she remained." The older gentleman said nothing about her, but they announced on leaving that Dinah was always to accompany the little lady, so she shall ride now. Hamis bowed, placing his hand on his heart, and said, "Let us hasten, sir, for otherwise the Qatr train will set off." The baggage was ready, so they were at the station on time. The distance between Medinet and Karak is not more than 19 miles, but the trains on the branch line which connects these localities move slowly and the stops were uncommonly frequent. If Staś had been alone, he undoubtedly would have preferred to ride camelback, as he calculated that Idris and Gebr, having started 2 hours before the train, would be earlier in El Karak. But for Nell, such a ride would be too long, and the little guardian, who took very much to heart the warnings of both parents, did not want to expose the little girl to fatigue. After all, the time passed for both so quickly that they scarcely noticed when they stopped in Garak. The little station from which Englishmen usually make excursions to Wadi Ryan was almost entirely deserted. They found only a few veiled women with baskets of mandarin oranges, 2 unknown Bedouin camel drivers, together with Idris and Gebr, with 7 camels, one of which was heavily packed. Of Pan Tarkowski and Mr. Rawlinson there was no trace, but Idris in this manner explained their absence. The older gentlemen went into the desert to pitch the tents, which they brought with them from Etzach, and ordered us to follow them. "And how shall we find them among the sand hills?" asked Staś. "They send guides who will lead us to them." Saying this, he pointed to the Bedouins. The older of them bowed, rubbed with his finger the one eye which he possessed, and said, "Our camels are not as fat, but are not less speedy than yours. After an hour we shall be there." Staś was glad that he would pass the night on the desert, but Nell feigned a certain disappointment, for she had been certain that she would meet her papa in Garak. In the meantime, the station master, a sleepy Egyptian with a red fez and dark spectacles, approached them, and not having anything else to do, began to stare at the European children. "These are the children of those Englishmen who rode this morning with rifles to the desert," said Idris, placing Nell on the saddle. Staś, handing his short rifle to Hamis, sat beside her, for the saddle was wide and had the shape of a palanquin without a roof. Dinah sat behind Hamis, the others took separate camels, and the party started. If the station master had stared at them longer, he might perhaps have wondered that those Englishmen of whom Idris spoke rode directly to the ruins on the south, while this party at once directed its movements towards Talay in a different direction. But the station master before that time had returned home, as no other train arrived that day at Karak. The hour was 5 in the afternoon. The weather was splendid. The sun had already passed on that side of the Nile and declined over the desert, sinking into the golden and purple twilight glowing on the western side of the sky. The atmosphere was so permeated with the roseate luster that the eyes blinked from its superfluity. The fields assumed a lily tint, while the distant sand hills, strongly relieved against the background of the twilight, had a hue of pure amethyst. The world lost the traits of reality and appeared to be one play of supernal lights. While they rode over a verdant and cultivated region, the guide, a Bedouin, conducted the caravan with a moderate pace. But with the moment that the hard sand cracked under the feet of the camels, everything changed. "Yalla, yalla!" suddenly yelled wild voices, and simultaneously could be heard the swish of the whips, and the camels, having changed from an ambling pace into a full gallop, began to speed like the whirlwind, throwing up with their feet the sand and gravel of the desert. "Yalla, yalla!" The ambling pace of a camel jolts more, while the gallop with which this animal seldom runs swings more. So the children enjoyed this mad ride. But it is known that even in a swing, too much rapid movement causes dizziness. Accordingly, after a certain time, when the speed did not cease, Nell began to get dizzy and her eyes grew dim. "Staś, why are we flying so?" she exclaimed, turning to her companion. "I think that they allowed them to get into too much of a gallop and now cannot check them," answered Staś. But observing that the little girl's face was becoming pale, he shouted at the Bedouins running ahead to slacken their pace. His calls, however, had only this result, that again resounded the cries of "Yalla," and the animals increased their speed. The boy thought at first that the Bedouins did not hear him, but when on his repeated orders there was no response, and when Gebr, who was riding behind him, did not cease lashing the camel on which he sat with Nell, he thought it was not the camels that were so spirited, but that the men, for some reason unknown to him, were in a great hurry. It occurred to him that they might have taken the wrong road, and that, desiring to make up for lost time, they now were speeding from fear that the older gentleman might scold them because of a late arrival. But after a while he understood that such could not be the case, as Mr. Rawlinson would have been more angered for unnecessarily fatiguing Nell. Then what did it mean? And why did they not obey his commands? In the heart of the boy, anger and fear for Nell began to rise. "Stop!" he shouted, with his whole strength, addressing Gebr. "Our scout, be silent!" the Sudanese yelled in reply, and they sped on. In Egypt night falls about 6 o'clock, so the twilight soon became extinct, and after a certain time the great moon, ruddy from the reflection of the twilight, rolled on and illuminated the desert with a gentle light. In the silence could be heard only the heavy breathing of the camels, the rapid hoof-beats on the sand, and at times the swish of whips. Nell was so tired that Staś had to hold her on the saddle. Every little while she asked how soon they would reach their destination, and evidently was buoyed up only by the hope of an early meeting with her father. But in vain both children gazed around. 1 hour passed, then another. Neither tents nor campfires could be seen. Then the hair rose on Stash's head, for he realized that they were kidnapped.